In sub-Saharan Africa, about 90% of the land is held under customary tenure. Customary tenure can be defined as a set of rules and norms that govern allocation, use and access, control, ownership and transfer of land and other natural resources. But what does this mean in the African context, especially when it comes to the well-being of women who are more widely the guardians and cultivators of land in practice? Recent Brindex surveys show that in sub-Saharan Africa, nearly 50% of women feared losing their land in the event of divorce or death of a spouse. African governments, civil society organizations, and Western donors have introduced programs that advocate for the registration of customary land rights as a way to protect the poor from the rise in demand for land. These programs are embedded in evolutionary models of land tenure rights, which pay little attention to local dynamics and their implications for women. We took a deeper look into two countries in particular, Zambia and Mozambique. In Zambia, new customary tenure relations that transcend the dualism between statutory and idealized customary systems as officially reflected in land policies are emerging. This is due to multiple demands for land from above and from below. In January 2020, we went to Nyimba district to try and get deeper insights through an empirical study which focused on women living on customary land. Since 2000, numerous changes have been observed in Nyimba. First, the district's population grew from 70,299 in 2000 to 102,834 in 2020. Second, in the year 2000, 1,119 people lived in the urban zone. In 2020, that number increased to 16,276. The expansion of urbanization means a rise in demand for land for housing. There is currently a housing backlog of 5,636, and this is projected to increase to 14,617 in a decade. The local authorities have already zoned 3,000 residential parcels on acquired customary land. The major player in actualizing the proposed housing development project was the Zambia National Building Society, which had completed 493 houses, followed by the Ministry of Works and Supply with 30 houses and the Ministry of Local Government with 4. Third was the conversion of customary land to game ranches to attract tourists for game viewing, trophy hunting, photos, and so on, thus increasing demand for land. Fourth was the threat of disposition for private mining accumulation. Approximately 50 mining prospectors had obtained prospecting licenses for mineral explorations since 2012. Fifth was the continued marginalization of women in the ownership of customary land and their eviction in the event of family disputes, divorce, or death of a spouse, leading to increased conflict.
So amalira alume wangu tenzolima kusiria kwenza pongozi. So amalira ula munde nze tipoka. So aliko etipasa lomba munda neba. Hatipasa munda mwenze mu 2005. Talimama mpaka kuzofika mu 2020. So amina olomba so stringezi nambo uje bantu ati mfuno jubako oku kuti niguliseko munda. Komaneo sani uja. Nungo kumvatira ku bantu ati ayofuna jiweko munda oku kuti agulise. Ofuna jiwako munda kuti agulise. Koma kuti nani fishire mau officially. Ndiye panaona kuti pantu pali vuto. Ndiye vuto inakumana naye amini hiyo. Enzana tipasa sina gula nasebere baso. Nasebere. So nombo to kamba bogulisa ni bana mbali osati bena sebera koma bana bao ndio kamba zogulisa so apa chipepa nilibe ndikalibotenga.
Civil society organizations, in particular the Zambia Land Alliance and Western donor agencies, responded to these pressures by introducing a voluntary program to register customary land rights through the Customary Land Holding Certificate. The CLHC was not in the statutory law, but it allowed for surveying of boundaries, documentation, and registration of customary land with the chief. The process of acquiring the certificate in Yimba is as follows. 1. An individual land rights holder voluntarily gets a CLHC application form from the chief or his designates at a cost of 50 kwacha or $2.75. 2. A village head and the land allocation committee appointed by the chief to oversee the process inspect the land to verify that there are no disputes on whether the applicant owns the land. In the event of disputes, local elders try to resolve the dispute. If the resolution of the dispute fails, the process does not proceed. 3. Where there are no disputes, the village head and the LAC consult neighbors to verify the boundaries. The neighbors have to approve in order for the process to proceed. 4. Land sizes are estimated with the help of para-surveyors when available. 5. Once the neighbors have verified, the chief will grant authorization. 6. The applicant then pays the fees for the CLHC, which differ according to the land size. 7. The CLHC will be recorded on the computer stored at the chief's palace.
Yo tolera form palira ntawi yenze 30 kwacha and then certificate kawera tenzolipira ma 150 so pamozi enzopanga 180 komalomba beikako.
The cost of acquiring a certificate is between 100 kwacha to 300 kwacha, which is approximately between $5 to $16.
Monkhani ya land nipeza mavuto monga mkati mwa vantu vena tipeza munda etipasa munda makolo wonena kuti molimamo so tili nkati mwa kulima na bwana vangu nikupezeka kuti vantu vena nikuyambako kamba kunena kuti malo awa mulunkalemo ni vanu lini malo awa ni vasusewu so mwe kunkhalamo kwanu nchifukwa chopempha makolo vasu so apa lomba tifuna titole mindayi titikolimamo so tinenawo izo zingachitike lini so tipeza petiwona kuti tambako kangana nawo ye petiluta kwa mfumu andake kotola chinji pepa iyo ya landi kuti chongo chala chisile so abantu petitola pepa ila ya landi ipezeka kuti beso avochita so palino nthawe kuliyema wali wose batulandira koma tingo zilimira lomba apa kuliye vuto.
Problem ene facing amu pankhani ya landi ni malo yolimapo kumunda. Nakwatiliwa tenze tepasi wa munda ku family ya lume wangu wechisia amayi bawo na tate bawo. But askulu wao wechizowera nokamba kuti munda muchokemo. Ndaba munda wenu mnalume so usakile wako munda. Sote chokamo munda mula nishitirie na kolima kulikonse. So mphamvu ya Mulungu kwewera abantu nazoka matane niliko na munda ningakutandize nkoni kuti mkoshita ko renti. Sote nzoshitolipira for 5 years tulipira munda kushita renti tulimamo. And then afterwards ndiye pete chizopeza munda ogula tegula munda wasu noluta kulanda alliance noshita kwa acquire certificate so this time kuliye chongo ndiye mwete nkhalira kuti tipeze munda. So nepezamo kuti soti kutola paper kapa certificate ya kulanda alliance iliko bwino chifukwa chakuti munda kapena land unkhala protected paliye anga kushite disturb ngati wapezeka na paper ya land alliance na silija ndiye problem yete facing ako pankhani ya land. So it important wa muntu watolako paper kuti paper ila iko kushita chinji iko kushitako protect chifukwa unkhala na chitetezo chokwana.
However, not all married women benefited, as this depended on the degree of patriarchy in families. The listing of one person as the landholder on the certificate negatively affected some married women who still lived under strong patriarchal families. In some of these cases, the husband would simply put someone else's name, preferably a son, brother, or uncle, as the next of kin on the CLHC. this disadvantaged the women in the case of divorce or death of the husband.
What we're saying is that women also should come on board. For married people, it's up to them, the two of them, to decide. It's not us to tell them to say, no, zina yao ikaremuri bakazi or bamuni. It's up to the couple to decide whose name that certificate will be. There's what we call joint ownership. If the couple feels, apapamaro ni panu na pangu, so our names, both of us, will appear on the certificate, or neo ndine mutu wa nyumba, so let my name appear, and then you will be the next of kin as my wife, and then we also put our children. That is also okay. But the thing is, at the end of the day, ija land is ankara protected, right? So I think that is the most important thing. It's protecting the land where we are. If it's joint ownership, that is okay. If you feel your wife also can have their land rights documented on that piece of land, that is also okay. But we're also calling on women that have lost their husbands and they still have land that is not documented. They can still come on board and have their land documented through their chief. For single women as well, I understand your customs and traditions do not discriminate women that are single. They too can have their land rights documented and they request for certificates from the chief.
According to Simbeye, the ZLA Nimba District Coordinator, from January 2019 to January 2021, 3,500 people had acquired certificates. Out of these, 1,700 are women. This translates to 48.6%, which is a significant change in a patriarchal society where, according to Chief Ndake, who is in charge of Nimba, women were considered as part of the field. However, the majority of the women who acquired land were married. For example, in Kaliwe Ward, 100% of the women who had CLHCs were married. The married women wanted freedom from patriarchy and to avoid eviction in the case of death of a husband.
Neo nifuma kutauni mu 1987 kuwela kuno konka makolo. So peni wela kuno ni kumunzi kwa tate. So anatipasa malo. Kuti malo abantu bati modi mamu. So niye malo batu kaludi mama nalomba. So hii mankala ko problem ku family nikanena kuti ya malo wechi nisira makolo atate mwadira. Nitole chipepa so makolo zune na akina kuti aimungatoleli nchipepa. Irandi ni ya family so mwe mungatoleli ni chipepa pamalo ba family. So kunkala kula bila poteto nenze niruta kwa nyankama kuyo konsha nguti na nyankama mbwani malo abanuri mama. So nyankama nipeche nati ivo ni vololedwa so mweyo sakira nitela ndrama mukatole pepa bala malo ni banu mwali mama ntawa ya itali so mufunikira mukatole pepa. So tenzo tuyembekezela lomba kutiti tole pepa pamalo niye mavuto benenzo kumana nao mulandi yanolima.
Kamba kusenza mulino munda namba 1997 napaswa na anko Edman. After one pasa pamene namba kusenzera pano. Namvera program ya kuti funika kuti munda unkhale na pepa 2013 nambako programu yongfuna kunkhala na pepa 2014 natenga pepa au na munda. First naenda kwa area nduna kwenda kutenga fomu na saina naibwezeramu bananyamola bandana anaenda nao kwa ndake manata anatita na first trip tunaenda sainilana za fomu anatufunza ko tumafunzo tunao tu tinaliko yanka tabwerako banatafuta ntawe banatita na 40 tunaenda futi kwa ndake tunaenda sainilana notuza tumwembekeze time iliyonse certificate za bwera mpaka 2014 anatita na 40 mpamene wanatipasa manje certificate ya munda. Mpamene na sinota munda manje nankhala nawo wakuti ni mwina wake manje nibeza ufutana na muntu. Maneba tunasainilana. Since waneba ni road mbuye futi kuja kuli road kuja ni kumunzi. Naika na chinjirira munda so munda uli ukuru road so ini pakati. Aneba kuja tunasainilana.
Single women without children were the lowest category of beneficiary on the certificate because the society largely considers them as having user rights within the family and in extreme cases as part of family property. Single women could apply for the CLHC, but they had to get consent from the family.
Mavuto olengesha kuti tisatole mapepa ne awalandala yansi ni anyinji. Kama kakuti makolo amene wakatipasa minda ila tevana kuti titolo nena kuti ni kwakoli ni kuweka songa kwa nshemu tutole munda anu wa muntu aliyense wala wewe ungausiye so kutola pepa yaye koma chifuna cha tutole pepa yala tili nacho koma tuleshewa tukangiwa kamba ka family wenango so ndeja tukangiwira utotolewa mapepa so ndecho nkhacho tivuta ba family wenango ukana kutotolewa mapepa koma wamunde tipasa.
Regardless of their marital status, some vulnerable and poor women with inadequate access to information knew little about the process and in many cases could not afford the CLHC, putting the program beyond the reach of many, especially in a country where 83% of the population in rural areas live below the poverty line, with extreme poverty highest in female-headed households.
So njira yakine ni yakuti njira ingapezekeko bwino fukwa mafomu watu filinga po mapepa amene ochitowera nthawi yakine kuno mbapa yakine ombwako lini kuti mapepa ewera kapena ni kwa nduna solomba kuti akaluta akatoleko mapepa wala akapeza kuti mapepa chisachani yasira so umwayi wanzeko chaka cha sira manduno chokera kwa chifi zenzopitamo munga maskulu umo mafumu enzona unsa so yamene yanjira na eve ni abwino yakuti vantu anga ndembesheko ma certificate ero nakantengo kabwino konditu chifukwa nthawi yakine ni ndalama yosowa muntu kuti akatoleko certificate.
Nezofuna onjezapo panjira yakine ingathandizire kuti kapena pafupifupi wina aliyense mumuzanga nkhalene na pepa ya malo chifukwa monga mwanuonera kuno kwaso kapena ndavanu nkhala kumbali nuona monga yunkhalako kamozi pachaka ndiye pakuwera nayo mapepa kuti kuli nkhani yotola mapepa so nuona monga chingathandizire nchakuti ala mapepa ofaniko nkhalako nthawi zonse kuti paira nthawi yakuti pakine muntu wapeza ndalama ngabe nayo ngati mapepa yali pafupi muntu angatole.
For some women who acquired the CLHC, it was not a one-generation benefit. It seemed that women could bequeath land by stating the next of kin on the CLHC. Most women prefer to register their child, preferably their daughters and sisters, as their next of kin.
Certificate ili mzina yanga chifukwa chakuti malo yano napasiwa na wa family. Na fakapo bana chifukwa chakuti mwina ningamwalire amna wangaganize kutenga mkazi winangu bana wangasauke chifukwa mamalo napaswa na wa family veve wananikwatira chabe wanachuka kutali mwina wangaganize kwenda kwao kapena kwatira mkazi winangu angasauke ni wana wanga.
Based on our data, most households indicated that there was no change in terms of production activities, yields and investments directly related to the acquisition of the CLHC. We found no evidence of the CLHC being used to apply for loans from the banks, although some beneficiaries had plans to do so. However, given that these were low-income households living below the poverty datum line, the CLHC was not likely to be a sufficient condition.
To some extent, those same pieces of titles can be used to secure some some financing somewhere, because what the chief gives is not fake, it's genuine. The land is under his authority and he has apportioned it to a Mr. A or to a Miss B, and those can go and show that we have been given this land. Some institutions may be flexible enough to say, okay, this is recognizable and we shall give you the financing that you are requesting for.
We observe that the CLHC is leading to unintended increased local inequalities. In some cases, where there was an increase in production, it was not because of the certificate per se, but because those with the certificate were getting preferential farming support.
So we are going back to those farmers that had acquired certificates, and even still encouraging those that didn't acquire in the first phase of the project to continue also applying for the land. So under this project that we did, we also ensure that farmers that had certificates were actually trained into issues of smart agriculture practices. We had actually trained them to ensure that they have alternative means of generating income aside from the actual farming, considering that there are these issues of climate change that farmers are experiencing.
What is the way forward? Firstly, the majority of women land rights holders, with or without the CLHC, prefer to live under customary compared to statutory tenure. The major reason was that customary land was cheaper and that it supported a diverse range of land-based livelihoods. The chief and village heads also did not want the conversion of customary tenure to state tenure to retain authority and power over land. There was therefore an unusual alliance between women and traditional leaders.
Chaninga kano sankhira malo aku kanso ngama kambira po abachoka apo kamba kutimala kwa edmani aliye malipira ali wonse bame bineninga haukiro tinika khale malo aku kanso tazi yake nezanivuta ko ndrama zati nilipire nishiva malo akanivute.
Chaninga kambeko nchakuti paliye phindu kuluta ku kanso koma nchimozimozi vakamba ayangu kuluta kwa mfumu akupasa malo akwa mfumu ana ufulu kai ku kanso nchoziwikiratu kuti olipirisha omba kwa mfumu ni ufulu nkhala munjira ili yonse kuliye kukulipirisha.
Secondly, there were contradictions within the state. Some government officials saw the CLHC as a stepping stone towards fully fledged titling. This is in line with the World Bank's view that supporting local processes to graduate towards titling is less costly and generates minimum conflict. On the other hand, others advocated for the abandonment of the CLHC and adoption of a full titling program characterized by the conversion of customary land to state leasehold tenure as being more secure for women. In Mozambique, the 1997 land law and its regulations provide for the recognition of customary and good faith occupation land rights and establish the mechanisms for registering these land use rights, known in Portuguese as direito de uso e aproveitamento da terra, for individuals, communities, and investors. Consequently, the Mozambique government launched the Terra Segura program in 2015. Consistent with the state's projects of high modernism, the program set out to register 5 million individual duats, delimit 4,000 communities' land, and issue duats in 7 years, a target that was never met. In February 2021, we conducted a first phase of in-depth interviews, life histories, and focus group discussions with women who live under customary tenure in Namatanda district located in Sofala province, Mozambique.
Tenda bana na pena shanu tikakhala pa nyumba pa vuwachi pakafe pa nyumba vuwachi chegase tu tempo tauna senhor nango agusa treino ife biti pagare treino ile tapaga 500 mitikais ndikumsar vivere atene bana penanga pa vivere pano iye mbazasiranga zinango pakusiranga zinango basemba já asema 2017 mbangwata mbabwesa papi mbabwesa pano pa nyumba ndechi dakwata inkaza iche tena zino kumunda anti takalima tensenene machitepa chinchino netu kulima vile nsenene takapita kumunda ndikuita ja anisho mimi ndikulima ndekha ine napyananga iye ngabe konda jutare asanga ndikwena kuibush kato ndipo ichi nedzashigase tutembo panango fekuita briga ine na iye mamunanga kungoti buka pano kike pano mbamba panga buka pano ine ngatawira ine buka pano tangwetreno ine tagula ile na iye akafuna iye analomari ndiye pindi mapashtache pindi ngoza che romari pesa kokwenda ine mndisala pano nanapenanga mini kuzana penanga akanisiya iye panango mchigari musetu temu mino na mamunanga mbukusembiwa ine nasiyambo anapenanga pano mbaviro kambo ine mini kavira mbusiti nangombo.
Most of the vulnerable women did not know about the Mozambican law of 1997, the Terra Segura program, and the WBG and other donor-driven processes meant to register their land rights. This showed limited public consultation in policy-making processes. For example, Dorca Domingo John, a married woman with 6 children, explained she had never heard about the duat and doesn't know what it is. This line of response was common amongst most women interviewed. A few women with better access to information through participation in local groups knew about the duat but did not know the process of acquiring it.
Pensione fino a Budapest, Kamataka. Ndikukwambo na kuonambo brigada ingatenepa mabwera takomera maningi ife atizika jwa chintu na tenepa na kutifundisambo ncheru senezi ife takomera kuti tipaswe titemba mejudi veredade madocumento are tikonde kukatira maminda na kuti maminda ndo udidi kuna ife kurubudira maminda hapana udidi munda hapana kuveveri kwatu ndi munda mataka ndiyo changu tiupresentarine kuna imwe brigada mabwera brigada.
Even women who planned to independently acquire the duat had no information about the cost. On estimation, it cost about $400 to register between 2 to 10 hectares of land, which was far out of reach of indigent households in Namatanda. That price is a huge jump compared to the price of $8 that is paid in Nyimba district in Zambia for the same size of land. Even though the project was cast as compulsory by state officials, it had gendered outcomes. The process of land delimitation marginalized women as most were not consulted as required by the law.
Eu tenho 7 hectares do milho, mais 1 hectare de arroz. Lá na mashamba que eu costumo ir lá, sou eu como mulher. E lá na mashamba entrou uma brigada de vir medir. Estava a medir de casa até no mashamba. Pode surgir dia meu marido a discutir por causa dessa mashamba. Eu também vou a lutar. Aonde está o governo para poder aproveitar também essa mashamba, porque sou eu que estou aí a trabalhar aí.
Most of the duats were registered under the name of husbands or male relatives. Women were to benefit in their dependent positions as the wives of landowners in idealized households. This is despite the provisions in policy that allow for joint registration. According to Lorenzo Mavungire, the chief of Siluvo locality, 800 duats out of 3,000 were registered under women, most of them being widows. This translates to only 26.6% of women with duats, which is less than the WBG's target of 40%. This is consistent with Mozambique's National Directorate of Lands 2015 data, which showed that only 20% of duats were registered to women. This is a big difference compared to Zambia, where more married women benefited from the certificate and were able to register the land in their own names even if they are married.
Ine pano pa kentaro pale yamamidiriwi kentaro ile pakumidiri kentaro dzina dapita pale njamamuna uku ndikukhalira kuti kentaro ya kumunda itali yawo kumunda ngejamidiriwi munda anga ndinadzalimiramo ndine dzina yanga napita sambo yanga tangu munda ule ndikulimirira mbani ndine kumunda kule ningaenda ningamidiriwi na ikadzina yanga tangu munda ule kundijudari vizinji munda ule ningalima produsawe sabusene umune ndamangisa naye nyumba yanga ndikukhalira kuti ningadzamalisa ningalima chitowe changa ndigule mashaba anga ndikhomese nyumba yanga na munda angawo munda kundibulisira pinto yakwanira kumunda.
Some women with duats thought that they would be able to enforce their property rights against investors, outsiders, and family members who might want to evict them in the case of disputes. In general, there was a belief that the duat would reduce local conflicts and struggles over land. To this extent, one can argue that formalization is improving perceptions of tenure security for some beneficiaries.
Nós, como mulher também, sob detera, nós também temos direito. O marido, quando vingar, você dizer que vai na tua casa, ou vai aonde você mesmo, não pode sair de qualquer maneira. Sair também a comunicar a autoridade para ser resolvido, porque nós também temos direito de ter, nós como mulher. Mulher é que tem sabedoria de ter. E ele que vai na mashamba, faz tudo lá na mashamba. Não pode aceitar sair sem ser resolvido. Vai no bairro quando não conseguir, vai também até no tribunal.
According to the WBG, the long-term impact of the project is to improve the environment for the creation of investment initiatives by households, communities, or the private sector. One of the key results is to ensure that 90% of SIGIT is up-to-date, operational, and available for use, including a web portal that allows public access to the National Land Cadastre data. By registering land in the Land Information Management System, they tend to protect the poor with insecure tenure from the high rise in demand for customary land, but at the same time provide state maps of legibility to investors. This will make customary land more visible to the market, which is not gender neutral, and create conditions that might result in the loss of land for many of the rural poor women. We hope the gendered implications we have captured will enrich public policy debates on what tenure reforms work best for millions of women living on customary land in Africa.